Hello, my name is Daniel Hodap, and we are the facilitators of the Law of One Europe Telegram group. And today we have another session with our teacher and amazing host, Gabriel Lugo. Hi, Gabriel.
Hey, Daniel. I love the amazing host. I feel like I'm in a TV show. Thank you. So, yeah, first, I just wanted to express my gratitude to be part of this group and to do this Law of One. I have been only doing Law of One content now for this group and just some spaced videos on my channel. So, it's nice to join a group with the same affinity for this material and this philosophy. Speaking of that philosophy, today we're going to get into session 19, which has the, I would say, the first parts in the material where they talk about evolution from second density to third. And there's a lot of thought-provoking Q&As that will go into self-awareness, the purpose of life, and all this. I mean, we can always take many things that are in the law of one and just see some of the philosophical questions that we have. And I think this is what seems to also attract a lot of people into the material is that they can get a very congruent philosophy that explains everything in a way that is simple, even though it seems complex. So that's my job. It's always to simplify things that seem complex. So we're going to start with question one, and I think I can cover this in one session. So this call should be enough for session 19. And I gotta say, this is one of my favorite sessions also because it talks about evolution. So before I deviate too much, let's begin with the first question, where Don is setting up the framework for what they want to do in terms of their questions. He says, I have been thinking over the scope of this book and will read this that I have thought. We are concerned in this communication with the evolution of mind, body, and spirit. I would like to fully investigate through questioning the mechanism of evolution in order to allow those interested individuals to participate in their own evolution. It seems to me that a good place to start would be the transition from the second to third density, then to investigate in detail the evolution of third density entities of Earth, paying particular attention to the mechanisms which help or hinder that evolution. This is my intent for direction of this working session. I hope that this is a correct direction. I have some words about this, but um, yeah, to finish Don's question, he says, what I would like to know first is, do all entities make a transition from second to third density, or are there some other entities who have never gone through this transition? So uh, it's interesting because Don wants to set the tone of to help others understand their evolution. Let's go through the evolution of second to third, and we can understand a little bit more. And I'm not sure how Don got into this or why he wanted, maybe just the desire for us to know where we come from and so on. But the answers do obviously hit those points of awareness evolving as opposed to a particular individual evolving, which is how we see it. So we're here about the perspective of linear evolution as we see it, and then the simultaneous evolution of the one, which seems paradoxical. And I love paradoxes because we can resolve them easy with just one understanding. So again, his question is a little bit more into if all entities transition from second to third density, or if there are some entities that never go through this transition. Ross says, your question presumes the space-time continuum understandings of intelligent energy, which animates your illusion. Within the context of this illusion, we may say that there are some which do not transfer from one particular density to another, for the continuum is finite. In the understanding which we have of the universe or creation as one infinite being, its heart beating as alive in its own intelligent energy, it merely is one beat of the heart of this intelligence from creation to creation. In this context, each and every entity of consciousness has, is, will experience, experiencing, experience each and every density. So, linear thought versus the simultaneous one being experiencing all densities. Um, there are some entities. I'm not sure how Ra perceives this. From my perspective, there is no such thing as an entity going from density to density. Rather, experiences are processed, and every one of us is an experience. We're not an entity. We are an experience of the same being. And that's a little bit more understandable. Um, we are just so convinced that we are an entity because our association with the experience, awareness is experience, our association or the association strongly with the experience of mind and body creates the illusion of an entity. And yet it is just the same one entity that is experiencing everything. So if you're aware of your experience and I am aware of my experience, that is the same awareness that is aware of experience. It's just that we experience different things. So that is the sort of playfulness that we get in creation. There is the illusion of entities, and I feel high resonance, of course, with what Rob begins saying. Your question presumes the space-time continuum understandings of the intelligent energy which animates your illusion. See? So we can probably get a little bit more deeper metaphysically on this, but I won't. The point is that if we can just understand this little and basic uh, premise of what reality is, then there is no such thing as a paradox. It's just two points of view. Do you see it from the point of separation or from unity? And you have access to these two. It's your choice to see it from one way or the other, and it's a playfulness thing. It's not really a mistake or anything. Question two, Don says, let's take the point at which an individualized entity of second density is ready for transition to third. Is this second density being what we would call animal? I think like Don asked the question, this is what he really wanted to ask, and then Ra gave that answer, and he was like, okay, let's be more specific about what I want to know. Second density to third. So is this an animal? So Rod's going to explain what second density actually is in our planet. They say there are three types of second density entities which become, shall we say, enspirited. The first is the animal. This is the most predominant. You would think it would be plants, but they say animals. I have my speculation on this. This is the most predominant. The second is vegetable, most especially that which you call sound vibration complex tree. These entities are capable of giving and receiving enough love to become individualized. The third category is mineral. Occasionally, a certain location, place, as you may call it, becomes energized to individuality through the love it receives and gives in relationship to a third density entity, which is in relationship to it. This is the least common transition. So, um, this is a good way to encompass all three examples, or even four examples. Um, by the way, I think it's very cute that Ra, sometimes they say there are three types of second density, and then they mention four. Or they say there is two, and they mention three. This happens a couple of times in the material. But yeah, so something that encompasses a view that encompasses these investment, there are two ways in which to, actually, there are more ways, but there are two main ways in which these entities, so to speak, become inspirited like Ross says. And I'll talk more about Inspirited in a minute. Ra will talk about this. I'll just expand on it. But this is, there is a growing awareness of these seeming entities, the most important being animals, because they are, at least in our planet, the ones that can have uh, a greater variety of experiences. And so they expose their experience more and more to individualization, right? And so I think that's why Ross says that these are the most predominant. And the second one being trees or plants, minerals. I suppose there is I'm not sure how they would have experiences on their own, just like animals would, but I would think that this is primarily because of humans. We humans actually can even create an individualized place, to become inspirited. Don't ask me metaphysically how that happens. We can all use our imagination for that. But that's the thing. That's one of the big investments that we do. And we know this with pets. We've talked about this in the past. So that investment of appreciation, acknowledgement, and just love, that's what creates the environment for that to be recognized, let's say. It's like saying, I see you, and then that can see itself. I'll explain why I say that they can see themselves. Don in question 3 says, when this transition from second to third density takes place, how does the entity, whether it be animal, tree, or mineral, become inspirited? Here's a joke that I used to make back then. Ross said in the previous question that entities become inspirited, right? They said there are three types of second density entities which become inspirited. Now they say entities do not become inspirited. So they become inspirited. No, they don't. No, the distinction here is that, like they say, they become aware of the intelligent energy within each portion, cell, or atom, as you may call it, of its beingness. This awareness is that which is awareness of that already given. From the infinite come all densities. The self-awareness comes from within, given the catalyst of certain experiences, understanding, as we may call this particular energy, the upward spiraling of the cell or atom or consciousness. You may then see that there is an inevitable pull towards the, what you may call, eventual realization of self. So the distinction that they're making here is actually that um, it's not like they suddenly are endowed with spirit. It's just that spirit opens. Or to see it a little bit more plain and understandable is that entities become aware of themselves. They know that they exist. That's self-awareness. And that is the characteristic of all humans. We know that we are. Whereas animals presumably have a very primitive, if any, self-awareness. So for us is just a given. That is self-realization. And I have also made the joke that, interestingly, what creates the requisite, or actually the what makes up third density, is that we are self-aware. And in order to graduate from third density, all you need to do is be self-aware. It's interesting, right? So you already have everything that you need to move to fourth density. Only that we forget that we are self-aware and we move into the illusion of dream, or the metaphorical dream of being asleep. So everything that we experience in our lives, all third density, has been just a forgetting that we are self-aware. And the solution to this, or the graduation out of this, is to get in touch with self-awareness. So much that we can talk about this, but that's self-realization, as we call it. Question 4, Ra or Don says, Then after the transition into third density, am I correct in assuming that these entities would then be in, we'll take Earth as an example. Would the entities then look like us? They would be in human form. Is this correct? And Ra says this is correct, taking your planetary sphere as an example. Don questions, when the first second density entities became third on this planet, was this with the help of the transfer of beings from Mars, or were there second density entities that evolve into third density with no outside influence? So native second densities moving into third, or was it from Mars? Ross says there were some second density entities which made the graduation into third with no outside stimulants, but only the efficient use of experience. So we're talking here about literally animals, primates that moved into third density with only their experience, no outside influence. Ra continues and says, others of your planetary second density join the third density cycle due to harvesting efforts by the same sort of sending of vibratory aid as those of the Confederation send you now. This communication was, however, telepathic rather than telepathic vocal or telepathic written due to the nature of second density beings. So there is also a stimulus, an outside stimulus, which is just like the influences that we get from other entities to wake up, you may say, sent to second density. I think there are other sessions, maybe just one more session where they talk about this particular effect or service, more appropriate to use that word, service of the Confederation to aid second density in graduation to third. So we get the first inkling of this service, which is from the Confederation. Don's going to ask more about this. And if you didn't catch it, it's the same sort of influence that they send here. I think I said that already. So, yeah, just stimulus from the Confederation. Don says, who sent the aid to the second density beings? Ra says, we call ourselves the Confederation of Planets in the service of the Infinite Creator. This is a simplification in order to ease the difficulty of understanding among your people. We hesitate to use the term sound vibration understanding, but it is closest to our meaning. They're so picky about words. I love that. And we have to. We have to. I find that little parentheses here. I find that we should never be comfortable with just um, a couple of words that seem general. We could, if we have a language, we can use many things to explore deeper and deeper what this means. If we want to approach, of course, through intellectual knowledge. So I love that Ra is always very picky about words because if we're using this, then we want to be as precise as possible. So not to leave any room for misinterpretation because we have different meanings for certain words. So they're basically just saying we of the Confederation of Planets are the ones that send this. But spoiler alert, this is going to be explained further in other sessions where it's not Ra who's sending this influence to second density. It's actually other social memory complex dedicated to second density. Question 7. Don says, then the Confederation also aided in second density to third density transition. Is this correct? Ra says, we must qualify correctness of this query. A portion of the Confederation, which is not working with third density but finds its aid best used in other harvests, that is, the second density harvest, is responsible for aid in these harvests. The Confederation, as we have stated previously in these sessions, is composed of many of those in other densities, in your own density, within your planetary sphere, and within the inner or angelic realms. Each of those entities developing a mind-body-spirit complex and then developing a social memory complex, and then dedicating this social memory complex to the singular service to the one creator may join the confederation. So they're just giving a full description of what the confederation is here. Um, Now I'm wondering if this is the part that I'm thinking, and it's not in another session, because they're talking about a portion of the confederation, which is not working with third density, are the ones that aid second density. I'm, I'm curious if there is actually another session where they talk about this. But there it is. It's just a portion of the confederation, one of the social memory complexes, or maybe several one of them. Question 8, Don says, well, did this second density to third density transition take place 75,000 years ago? Approximate process. This is correct. Don says, question 9, where did the second density beings get physical vehicles of third density type to incarnate into? Ra says, there were among those upon this second density plane, those forms which, when exposed to third density vibrations, so changing of vibration on the planet, became the third density, as you would call sound vibration, human entities. That is, there was loss of the hair or body hair, as you call it, the clothing of the body to protect it, the changing of the structure of the neck, jaw, and forehead in order to allow the easier vocalization and the larger cranial development characteristic of third density needs. This was a normal transfiguration. So these are all the changes that happen in our distant relative ancestor primates back then. I've always speculated that that was the natural progression biologically here on Earth, and um, every other entity or source of soul must have adapted to this. And there lies some of the difficulties that some may have, or the differences. I'm not sure how this all mixes into like one of us. Like, do we have a mix of all of this? Is there more influence? Sort of like genetic, right? Like, how much do you have of one and the other? I figure something like that is happening here because there is such a melting pot in our planet, right? But think about it. If we had a planet that only evolved from the primates here, second density, maybe with some external influence of the Confederation, social memory complexes, and so on, but no mixing of other vibrations from other planets. Like we know the wanderers. Wanderers have these allergic reactions, and it's just like an incompatibility from their origin. It gets very complex, but it's fascinating to imagine all these things. And we're a product of that. So let me continue before I deviate again. Question 10. Don says, over approximately how long a period of time does, he pauses and says, was this transfiguration? It must have been very short. So how long did this transfiguration, this change, this mutation, if you will, happen? Ross says, the assumption is correct that it was very short. I don't think it was very short. They say in our terms, at least. Oh, okay. That's that makes sense. It must have been very short. And they say, oh, your assumption is correct in our terms, at least. Of course, for them, it's like a second. It was within a generation and one half, as you know, these things. Those who had been harvested on this planet were able to use the newly created physical complex of chemical elements suitable for third density lessons. So you may think, oh, generation and a half is it's not too much, a couple of 100 years. It isn't. It was over 1,000, right? Because that was the lifespan of the entities back then. Our ancestors were allegedly living 700-year lifespans or something like that. So that's over 1,000 years that it took for this transfiguration. But I'm thinking this was the transition between second to third. So right at the moment when 75,000 years ago this happened. Um, and this is, I forget which source I got this from, but uh, there's a ballpark of 75,000 years when we began this. We have records of self-awareness. We began creating uh, more intelligent tools and so on. But yeah, I think that's been established. Okay, question 11. Don says, can you tell me how this new bodily complex was suited to third density lessons and what those lessons were? It's a pretty good question. Here we get into the necessity, the pathway. Let's call it a pathway. Yes, the pathway of moving from third to fourth. Ross says there is one necessity for third density. That necessity is self-awareness or self-consciousness. So that's what we need to be third density. All third density entities are self-aware because they go from mind-body complexes to mind-body spirit complexes. They awaken the spirit. And the spirit is equal to the capacity of self-awareness, self-reflection, which is our doom as well, by the way. We fall into, we fall from the Garden of Eden because we have self reflection. So it's all mixed in. It's just all one thing. They continue saying, in order to be capable of such, this chemical complex of body must be capable of the abstract thought. See, told you, it's our doom as well. Thus, the fundamental necessity is the combination of rational and intuitive thinking. This was transitory in the second density forms, operating largely upon intuition, which prove through practice to yield results. So animals, to use that example, they use intuition, a sort of primitive intuition, but you know, pretty good intuition, being connected with their environment. So it is the capacity for abstract thought. Now, these two play a role in the thinking mind or the processing part of the mind. Ross says the third density mind was capable of processing information in such a way as to think abstractly and in what could be termed useless ways in the sense of survival. This is the primary requisite. And no surprise, we're lost in rational thinking. That's where we kind of get anxiety and depression and all these undesired states of the mind when we get lost in that. So that's still useful and needed for third density experience and um, movement. So I'm going to finish reading before I continue. Last part of this answer, they say there are other important ingredients, the necessity for a weaker physical vehicle to encourage the use of the mind, the development of the already present awareness of the social complex. These also being necessary, the further development of physical dexterity in the sense of the hand, as we call this portion of the body complex. We're going to explore a little bit more this, so I won't talk much about it, but um, yeah, the capacity for abstract thought is what made us think or ask the questions, the fundamental questions, you know, who am I? Why am I here? What's my purpose? These questions are not really, they're not coming from intuition. Intuition just doesn't care. It just is as it is. Question 12. Speaking of questions, Don says, this seems to be a carefully planned or engineered stage of development. Can you tell me anything of the origin of this plan for the development? Ross says, we go back to previous information. Consider and remember the discussion of the logos. With the primal distortion of free will, each galaxy developed its own logos. This logos has complete free will in determining the paths of intelligent energy which promote the lessons of each of the densities, given the conditions of the planetary spheres and the sun bodies. So, was this engineer planned? Yes and no, I guess, because it's all part of the free will of experiencing in all kinds of ways separation, limitation, creation, manifestation, whatever you want to call it. It's just the fragmentation and experiencing of that fragmentation in a way that is coherent and makes sense. And we're here. Question 13. Don says, I will make a statement with respect to my understanding then and ask if I am correct. There is what I would call a physical catalyst operating at all times upon the densities in third density. I assume this operated approximately the same way in second density. It's a catalyst that acts through what we call pain and emotion. Is the primary reason for the weakening of the physical body and the elimination of body hair, etc., so that this catalyst would act more strongly upon the mind and therefore create the evolutionary process. So did we weaken the physical body and elimination of body hair and so on, so that this catalyst in particular would work more strongly, right? Ross says this is not entirely correct, although closely associated with the distortions of our understanding. Consider, if you will, the tree, for instance. It is self-sufficient. Consider, if you will, the third density entity. It is self-sufficient only through difficulty and deprivation. It is difficult to learn alone, for there is a built-in handicap, at once the great virtue and the great handicap of third density. That is the rational, intuitive mind, like I said before. It's a great handicap, and again, at the same time, a great virtue, having our rational, intuitive mind. They continue in saying, thus the weakening of the physical vehicle, as we call it, was designed to distort entities towards a predisposition to deal with each other. Thus, the lessons which approach a knowing of love can become. Now I'll talk about this. This catalyst then is shared between peoples as an important part of each self's development, as well as the experiences of the self in solitude and the synthesis of all experiences through meditation. The quickest way to learn is to deal with other selves. This is a much greater catalyst than dealing with the self. Dealing with the self without other selves is akin to living without what you would call mirrors. Thus, the self cannot see the fruits of its beingness. Thus, each may aid each by reflection. This is also a primary reason for the weakening of the physical vehicle, as we call the physical complex. So, the biggest thing here is that we experience each other, that we learn from each other, that we see ourselves through each other. That is the biggest thing. Weakening the physical body simply helps this because we need each other. And so if we need each other, then, well, guess what? We're going to be dealing with each other. And how does that feel? You know, um, 2020 was a great example of that for a lot of people. You know, you had to deal with whoever was living in with you, and some people thought it was uh, the greatest thing. Most of us, I would hope, but others thought it was the worst thing ever. They couldn't deal with each other. So that is the point, in essence. We could go deeper and deeper into this, but that's the point. Again, if we had a very strong physical, independent body, then who cares? I don't need you. Why would I have to deal with you? That's the help, the aid of weakening the physical body. Question 14. Don says, then we have second density beings who have primarily motivation towards service to self and possibly a little bit of service to others with respect to their immediate families going to third density and carrying this bias with them, but being in a position now where this bias will slowly be modified to one which is aimed toward a social complex and then ultimately toward union with them all, with the all. Am I correct? And Ra says, you are correct. So Don is just making the assumption that in second density, there is a primal motivation of, he calls it service to self, that doesn't really exist in second density, but rather, preservation of the self and the immediate family, right? The pack, the flock, these groups. And I think Ra is going to explain that, so I won't do it here. So there's that, and then carrying that bias, which is, tribal mentality of, being together and just my tribe and so on. And then, it grows and grows. That's at least the goal for even on the negative path, right? Even though they're not very really loving and kind with each other, but they need the corporation, as I call it. They need their own, structure, social memory complex. So now we're going to talk about a little philosophy here in terms of um, service to self and service to others coming from second density. Don expands and says, then the newest third density beings who've just made the transition from second are still strongly biased towards self-service. There must be many, there must be many other mechanisms to create an awareness of the possibility of service to others. There's a wrong assumption here, which is that second densities come with like a predisposition for service to self. He continues, Don, and says, I am wondering first two things. I'm wondering about the mechanism, and I'm wondering when the split takes place, where the entity is able to continue on the road towards service to self that will eventually take him to fourth or fifth density. I would assume that an entity can continue, can start, say, in second density with service totally to self and continue right on through and just stay on what we would call the path of service to self and never ever be pulled over. Is this correct? So he's assuming the second density starts with service to self and he's trying to draw the line of one of these entities not even considering service to others. Ross says this is incorrect. The second density concept of serving self includes the serving of those associated with tribe or pack. This is not seen in second density as separation of self and other self. All is seen as self, since in some forms of second density entities, if the tribe or pack becomes weakened, so does the entity within the tribe or pack. So the behavior, obviously, of these second density entities are as the pack being one. And that's why we get so much inspiration from animals because they work as one. But this is not service to self. This is just, primal instinct to preserve themselves. And they see themselves as part of the pack. So that's not precisely service to self. Ra continues and says the new or initial third density entity has this innocent, shall we say, bias or distortion towards viewing those in the family, the society, as you would call, perhaps country, as self. Thus, though a distortion not helpful for progress in third density, it is without polarity. So, key distinction here in terms of service to self coming from second density. It's um, it's a natural thing, obviously, to want to preserve that which is around you and gives you, nourishes you, right? But that's not inherently service to self because you, yes, at that point you're presented with the possibilities of seeing, yourself as more important than others and so creating a sort of separation. But like Ross said, and I think they used the perfect word, It's an innocent bias or distortion towards viewing this group, whether that be family, society, culture, tradition, patriotism, all these things. We can see them as innocent distortions towards trying to preserve something that feels like it's me. But I'm not limited to that. They finish saying the break becomes apparent when the entity perceives other selves as other selves and consciously, that's the key word, consciously, consciously determines to manipulate other selves for the benefit of the self. Ah, that's where it happens. This is the beginning of the road of which you speak. So that is the thing. It's always a conscious effort to manipulate other for my benefit because I am and he is, and I obviously deserve more than him. I
Gabriel,
deserve. Yes,
Tatjana, I have a question to that topic.
I may have an answer.
Well,
Should I
actually,
read it? Oh,
it was related with the question 14 and before of the first question 14, and I was like, I just going to reread it. It can be understood that humans are essentially beings of tier density because here it doesn't really say like, yeah, in your planet or in your sphere, you humans are tier density. But I was wondering if there are other tier density beings that we are not aware of or other forms that we can consider as tier density. And also because they say like the second density, like for example, the ape, like when you lose the hair and these kind of things, like you are becoming aware and then you are becoming human. So is there like any form that we maybe might see as a human, but it's still like second density?
something that looks human but is still second density? Is that the
Yeah.
question?
No, that's one. And the other
Mhm.
one is like, which other tier density beings are tier density? Because here it doesn't really say on planet Earth which other beings are tier density. It just says like we habit or inhabitants of the planet Earth or this sphere are on tier density. But that doesn't strictly means that we are alone in this tier density as beings. So I wanted to know also if there are other kind of beings that are considered tier density.
Yeah, I knew dolphins were going to appear there. I've also heard this. I don't know. I'm not sure. Yes, no, I'm not sure. Could. It's not in the raw material. Not that the raw material has everything. Um, could be that I have had conversations only with humans, though. I mean, other humans that look like me are the ones that I can attest that yes, we are third density because I can say, "Are you aware?" And you'll say yes. At least we can communicate. Does that mean that there are no other third densities? No, but everything else would be, I guess, speculation. And I don't mean that word in the bad way. It's just, it's the truth. We can say we can use our imagination for that. But did I have records of it or that I know of? No. Again, other materials, other people talk about this. It's not something that I can validate.
And the other way around, like beings of second density that might be still, I don't know, like look like second density, but they are already third density. So I'm just thinking like, for example, these maybe humans that are coming soon, like, and like babies that just die from the beginning. I remember I read somewhere like that the body was, or like the soul, body, soul, like the spirit, body and mind were not prepared to incarnate in third density, and that's the reason because you die so soon. Or like even people with disabilities or like parts of, I don't know, like body are not finally or complete as a human being, and that is like you are prepared for third density, but somehow you still second density.
I can
Can I
only play with
throw
my imagination for that.
Hmm?
can, can I throw in something here? What
Sure.
about that so-called Sasquatch or in Himalaya Yeti? Is that properly second or third density? Because I think it was mentioned somehow in the material as well.
I was just thinking about that. Yes, that we know of. And again, I don't think I'm at risk with, this audience and people who study the raw material to say this, but it's not to say that if it's not in the raw material, then we can't validate it. But it's just that the only source of information where I've gotten this is the raw material, and we tend to have ideas like once we study something, it's difficult to say where the rest of the information is coming from. So I guess I don't give too much of an importance to this information that comes somewhere else. I'm always hesitant to not sound like, absolutist with this. But yes, going with Daniel, like he said, we know of that. Um, that being that these Bigfoot or Sasquatch, they were supposed to be like their mind was third density, yet they were in a body that couldn't express that, and that's because they needed to alleviate so much karma. Now, I can go even deeper into speculation here and say that yes, maybe there are minds that are third density and they embody something, some sort of mind-body complex that limits them in their capacity to, influence Earth. I mean, it's just more speculation about the metaphysics of how this works. So that's why I I just don't feel comfortable with putting it up as a reality. The reason why I do resonate with a lot of the stuff here in the raw material is because it does check with my experience and all of our experiences. So when we start deviating to certain things, I start to lose interest because it's not easily verifiable in my experience, and it goes more into imagination and speculation, which I have nothing against, but I like to stay, as close to that which is verifiable in indirect experience. So yeah, that's it's not really my place, and it's just that I can't contribute too much to this. But I've heard all kinds of things, and usually that's what kind of turned me off from uh, continuing on those investigations. Just me individually, I just didn't find it interesting. Um, I love truth, and truth that can be tasted, that can be digested, palpable, tangible stuff. So that's what really turns me on.
Let's go ahead.
We're good. We continue.
Yes, please.
Okay. Where was I? I think it was question 16. So question 16, Don says, then through free will, sometime in the third density experience, the path splits. And an entity consciously probably does not consciously choose. Does an entity consciously choose this path at the initial splitting point? Ra says, we speak in generalities, which is dangerous for always inaccurate. However, we realize you look for the overview, so we will eliminate anomalies and speak of majorities. I love them, the way they speak. The majority of third density beings is far along the chosen path before realization of that path is conscious. That's pretty interesting. So many things that could be taken out of this because we're talking about the two paths. There is a positive and a negative. Because of resonance, because of past conditionings, because of the inertia of the mind, we may be on one of the two paths without even knowing it, not conscious of it. Thus, we find what I here in the raw material is called, well, it's not called, but I call it the phenomenon of wanderers who will never wake up. right? They will never become conscious of the path that they're in. And yet they cause so much influence around them and to others. So that's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing to be unaware of the path that you're in until the very end, whatever that is. Hitler comes to mind as the opposite. I don't think he was aware of being in the path of negativity, of service to self. Otherwise, he might have done a better job at his own polarization, which he didn't. So, again, it just shows that we don't have to be conscious of the path to be in it. Yet, when we become conscious of the path, then that's where it gets accelerated, catalyzed, improved, enhanced. Question 17, Don asks, can you tell me what bias creates their momentum toward the chosen path of service to self? He's interested in service to self. Ross says, we can speak only in metaphor. Some love the light, some love the darkness. It is a matter of the unique and infinitely various creator choosing and playing among its experiences as a child upon a picnic. Some enjoy the picnic and find the sun beautiful, the food delicious, the games refreshing, and glow with the joy of creation. Positive path. Some find the night delicious, their picnic being pain, difficulty, sufferings of others, and the examination of the perversities of nature. These enjoy a different picnic. Negative path. All these experiences are available. It is free will of each entity which chooses the form of play, the form of pleasure. All is well. Oh, that's the end. That feels like Ross said that. I'm saying it. All is well. Everybody enjoys a different picnic. It's a beautiful metaphor. Um, just what it is. I've been saying it. I think I said it in the last session. Positive, negative, they're all there for enjoyment, and it's just a matter of, what do you enjoy? What do you want doing? And if you like something, then keep doing it. Do more of it. No morality here. Question 18. Don says, I assume that an entity on either path can decide to choose paths at any time and possibly retrace steps. The path changing being more difficult the farther along is gone. Is this correct? Ross says this is incorrect. The further an entity has what you would call polarized, the more easily this entity may change polarity, for the more power and awareness the entity will have. Those truly helpless, here's a very moving phrase. First of all, let me just say onto the first line here or paragraph. Um, Don was assuming that to change polarities, you had to retrace your steps. It's not true because the more polarized you are, the more aware you are of, let's say, the creation, the way, the interaction, the dynamics of reality. You can change polarities right away. I would think that the change of polarity happens from negative to positive in higher densities only, and from positive to negative only here on third density. I may be wrong, but it just makes sense to me because it is possible in third density, obviously, to switch your polarities without even knowing it. But in higher densities, I think you're pretty aware, or that which is pretty aware. The very moving part is when they say those truly helpless are those who have not consciously chosen, but who repeat patterns without knowledge of the repetition or the meaning of the pattern. So we've all been caught in this. I'm not going to say others, but if we if we do introspection and we do pretty honest assessment of ourselves, we can see that we have experienced this repetition of patterns, unaware of why they repeat and also what they mean. So, yeah, these are truly helpless. The ones who have not consciously chosen, but repeat patterns without even knowing why or the meaning. Those are stuck. Sinkhole of indifference. Don says, I believe we have a very, very important point here. It then seems that there is an extreme potential in this polarization, the same as there is in, to make an analogy, using electricity. We have a positive and negative pole. The more you build a charge on either of these, the greater the potential difference and the greater the ability to do work, as we call it in the physical. This would seem to be, to me, this would seem to me to be the exact analogy that we have in consciousness here. Is this correct? And Ra says this is precisely correct. Good analogy between electricity, polarity, and work. Don says, well, this would seem then that there is a relationship then between what we perceive as physical phenomena, say the electrical phenomena, and the phenomena of consciousness, and that they, having stemmed from the one creator, are practically identical but have slightly different actions as something that is not recorded. Is this correct? Ross says, again, we oversimplify to answer your query. The physical complex alone is created of many, many energy or electromagnetic fields interacting due to intelligent energy. The mental configurations or distortions of each complex further adding fields of electromagnetic energy and distorting the physical complex patterns of energy. The spiritual aspect serving as a further complexity of fields, which is of itself perfect, but which can be realized in many distorted and unintegrated ways by the mind and body complexes of energy fields. Thus, instead of one, shall we say, magnet with one polarity, you have in the body-mind-spirit complex, little trivia here, this is one of the only two sessions where Ra said body-mind-spirit complex instead of mind-body-spirit complex. So we have one basic polarity instead of one basic polarity. Let me reread that after my pause. Instead of one magnet with one polarity, you have in the body-mind-spirit complex one basic polarity expressed in what you would call violet ray energy, the sum of the energy fields, but which is affected by thoughts of all kinds generated by the mind complex, by distortions of the body complex, and by the numerous relationships between the microcosm, which is the entity, and the macrocosm in many forms, which you may represent by viewing the stars, as you call them, each with a contributing energy ray which enters the electromagnetic web of the entity due to its individual distortions. So, in short, variety. We have variety of interpretations of these polarities, and that's why you will never find a mystic that looks or acts the same as the other, same with, I guess, negative mystics, Rasputin maybe. They all act differently because body and mind filter, move, distort even further, this polarity. And yeah, there's a beautiful combination there. I don't want to make this more complex than it already sounds, but that's basically what they're saying here. Even though there is a polarity in terms of ethical polarity, service to self, service to others, there is a variety of different configurations of body and mind to represent that. Don says, and this is one of the last questions. This will probably be the last question because we have the last one is just about maintenance with Carla. I won't read that. The last question is this then the root of what we call astrology? Ross says, this will be the last full question of this session. The root of astrology, as you speak it, is one way of perceiving the primal distortions which may be predicted along probability possibility lines given the, shall we say, cosmic orientations and configurations at the time of entrance into the physical mental complex of the spirit and at the time of the physical mental spiritual complex into the illusion. This then has the possibility of suggesting basic areas of distortion. this is no more than this, or there is no more than this. The part astrology plays is likened unto that one root among many. So, yes, I don't know how astrologers perceive this part, but yes, this is, I mean, that all makes sense about the root of astrology being, just this imprint, a simple imprint that just creates something but doesn't predict, right? Everything. It's just one root among many. And that's it. We kind of finish on a last isolated topic of astrology. But that's all I got today. Ooh, almost an hour. Perfectly.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. For me, also one of the very interesting sessions of the material. Yeah, we have a very active chat today, and I want to give the participants of the live call the opportunity to comment or to ask questions. If you wish to, then just raise your hand. This was a Sasquatch topic. I'm not really sure. It was mentioned once in the connection to the densities, but I'm not really sure if this one was a second density being, which is about to enter the third density, or the third density being, which is on the beginning of the third density. But they have some special that becomes setting. That one is what I remember. Yeah. So
Yeah,
what
I
it
kind of
is,
like this.
yeah, because it is in all levels very controversial discussed.
What is controversy?
Yeah, because there are so from different approaches, the meaning of Sasquatch, Bigfoot, or
Mm.
in Himalaya they call it Yeti, but it's for me basically the same being. And yeah, this for me is very interesting, and it will always catch my attention when I hear something about it.
Yeah, that's the one that came to mind when we were talking about the possibility of being third density in a second density body. Um, no possibility, I don't understand how that would work. Second density in third density bodies. That would make sense. But yeah, that's the only one that came to mind, which again, they mention here. I think we covered that already, yeah.
Yes. Okay, when no one want to ask live question or comments, then I would just ask Ria to give us some summarized closing words of this session.
Sure. Yeah, this last part, which was again, it's very touching. Um, where is it? Those truly helpless are those who have not consciously chosen, but who repeat patterns without knowledge of the repetition or the meaning of that pattern. And if we tie that in, right? Because we all have patterns. That's, it's like Jesus, I don't know how true this story is, well known, but when Jesus said, whoever is, I know it in Spanish, so I'll butcher it. Whoever is free from sins, throw this, can throw the stone or whatever. So we all have our patterns, right? Um, and then, where is it? When Ross says that this catalyst of which is shared between people, us interacting with each other, um, the reason, the purpose that we're here to experience each other, right? Each self's development, as well as the experiences of the self in solitude and the synthesis of all experience through meditation. So our patterns, they are happening in the mind first, then we act on them. And also, there is this dynamic, which we call the outer world, that reflects back to us our mental patterns. So every day, I used to say that we, as conscious seekers, we should be very aware of what's happening in our lives because we carry a little basket, let's say, and we collect catalysts throughout the day. And then we should sit with that basket in our particular picnic and, enjoy that catalyst, to taste that catalyst. And that is meditation. So to sit with one's thoughts allows us to just become aware of our patterns. I have a very particular approach to healing, liberation, shadow work, etc., etc. Just simply the purification of the mind, and that is through pure awareness. We don't care to do anything, just become aware of the patterns. That's where the magic happens. We may play the illusion of me doing something that's fine, but secretly in the background, what's happening is that a higher intelligence is um, it's rearranging these patterns, right? So we never get rid of things. That's just a very surface level language that we use for uh, becoming better, improving, and so on. We never get rid of anything. All we do is harmonize that which is already within and use it as a tool for service, whether that be self or others. But everything that we have, it only feels negative. It may feel unbearable only because we haven't harmonized it. That's it. And the way to harmonize is just to become very much aware, to become conscious of every single thought pattern that we have. And that's it. It's very simple. Meditation is the key.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. Very good closing words. Meditation is a key. So then, thank you very much, Gabriel. I'm much looking forward to see you next week.
Thank you, Daniel.
Session number 20. Thank you very much.